Getting fired isn't what destroys most employees' cases, but what employees do in the next 48 hours usually does. And I know that because I spent 30 years inside of executive HR, inside of the rooms where terminations, investigations, and documentation strategies all got built. I wasn't observing the system, I was inside of it. And I can tell you this with complete certainty. Most employees damage their position and their case before they ever speak to an external resource like an attorney or even a strategist like me who can help. And not because they are careless. It's because no one told them that the clock was already running and the company was already watching. And here's the part that nobody says out loud. The organization already anticipated your reaction. And the question is, were you prepared for theirs? Most professionals listening to this probably believe that they are competent, loyal, good employees, right? And the dangerous part is that most employees who get blindsided believe that too. This is HR Armor when work turns against you. And today we're going to talk about the 3 mistakes that quietly destroys employment cases in the first 48 hours after termination. Let's jump into the first mistake, and I see this all the time. The first mistake that is made is the wrong audience. People post publicly, they vent publicly, they even text publicly. I've seen people post on Facebook, LinkedIn, Slack, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, group chats. And the second that it becomes public, it stops being venting and it starts becoming evidence because they are already watching. When people feel powerless, they reach for visibility, validation, understanding, acknowledgement. I get that. But here's the truth. It's like when you get in a car accident and the first thing you do when you step outside your car is you start apologizing before you even understand who is at fault. That instinct is human, I know, but you're trying to calm the situation down before the facts are even assessed. You've already created a perceived responsibility, and that is exactly what happens when employees react publicly too fast, when they spill the beans before the beans are ready to be spilled. So here's an example, right? One of my clients wrote a social post and is on social media around right before midnight. It was around 11 p.m. at night, right? By the next morning, screenshots were already circulating internally. The post wasn't aggressive. It was just emotional. She was just speaking from a place of hurt, speaking her mind. 3 sentences. That's all she said. There was no profanity, right? There was no accusations. There was no, I'm going to get them type of language. But all of a sudden, the conversation shifted. It shifted away from the retaliation concerns that she brought forward before the termination and toward her professionalism and her emotional stability. And that's how fast the narrative changes. The employee at that time stopped being the victim and became the story itself. And people talk real fast, right? It's like listening to the phone or like the old game telephone, where we used to play. I used to play as a kid, telephone. You say one thing to one person, they say it to somebody else. They say it to somebody else. And then by the time it gets to the last person, the story is already changed. And that is exactly what happened at her job. Even though she made the post, the story was already circulating. That telephone was already going on at her job. So she thought that she was speaking to her network, speaking to her friends, but she was actually talking to the legal team. And most people are posting because they're hurt. They're angry. They're in shock. They're disappointed. They're disgusted. They're in a state of disbelief. And employees often document those reactions in real time and they document it publicly. But here's the thing. You're not creating content. You're creating discoverable material. That means that the company is watching your every move. They're documenting everything real time and they're saving it in their records to be used against you when it fits their narrative most. So here's what you're supposed to do instead. Less is more. Nothing public, nothing emotional, nothing in writing yet. No hot takes, right? Just save it, keep it in your back pocket. Nothing public at that time. Because once the public reaction starts and once people start to hear and understand the story, most people make the second mistake. Here's the second mistake. The second mistake is telling the wrong person. And this is the hardest one, honestly, right? The hardest one emotionally. It's usually a trusted coworker, a supportive colleague, a person who gets it. Then the employee shares what they think happens, legal thoughts, documentations, opinions about leadership, how they were done wrong, treated poorly, how the whole situation kind of unfolded. And here's the hardest things that professional learns at that time. Workplace loyalty and workplace dependency are not the same thing. Workplace relationships change under pressure because when people are against the wall, when people are questioned, when people are brought into the office of leadership, they protect themselves. That is human nature. It is instinct. It doesn't make them evil. It just makes them start with self-preservation. They don't want what happened to you to turn on them. They don't want that flashlight of you and everything that happened to you that you potentially complained to them about during the duration of your employment. They don't want those circumstances pointed to them and aimed at them instead of aimed at you. So I will say that most employees and workplace relationship and coworkers and those interactions could be genuine. They could honestly be genuine until survival enters the room. And once people feel their position may be affected, their life, their livelihood, their career, their monetary benefits, their sanity, their livelihood, then their priorities shift quickly. And a lot of times it's not out of malice, it's out of fear because they are held against the wall. Leadership will get them the moment that you're terminated, because this is how it goes, right? One of the first questions after a termination that HR says and HR asks is, who were they closest to internally? They're asking around and they're surveying the land, trying to figure out who was closest to you before you got terminated. And why? It's because people talk. People know that the person who is confronting you on Tuesday may be in HR on Thursday. And often, again, it's because of that self-preservation. They are going to sing like a canary, like a bird, like somebody who is just going to parrot everything that you said to them, thinking you were talking in confidence. They're going to say it out loud to HR or to leadership or to whoever is going to be asking them the questions. And people are shocked about that. But they shouldn't be, because many of your work friends turn into the number one witness for the company, not you. And that's just the system itself. That's not being paranoid. It's timing. And right now inside of the organization, it is not like for you to use your coworkers and use that environment as your safe space and process emotionally, because they're not your therapist. They're not your best friend from high school. They're not going to always have your back, especially when their back is against the wall. That is just how things happen. So speaking to the wrong person and depending on that person to have your back does not always work out in your favor, especially if termination is on the horizon or if you've already been terminated. And that brings me to the third point. The third mistake that people make within the first 48 hours after their termination is understanding the wrong clock, the wrong timeline, because most employees don't realize that timelines have already started. It's like waking up to a smoke alarm at 2 a.m. thinking the danger is not when you finally wake up, but the danger actually is, think about it, how long the fire was burning before you noticed it. That's the danger, not when you actually woke up. Depending on where you work and what has happened, some professional protection windows are actually really short, right? Federal employees may have as little as 45 days in certain situations, and sometimes lines are even shorter than that for other people. Then time moves fast when you have an important deadline on the clock. It's important to note that time may not start at the termination. Time could also be protected to and connected to that protected activity. So things such as retaliation, hostile work environment, denied promotions, earlier complaints, protected disclosures, meaning while employees are grieving that they lost their job, the window is already closing based on what happened before that event started. So I had a client. They came to me with 11 days left on the clock. Not 11 days after the termination, 11 days on the clock, which was already running. HR was already documenting. Leadership already had a file against them. And the employee was still processing during that time because they were grieving, right? Talking to attorneys who were turning them down and even deciding if they still had a case. So that's 11 days with no strategy. That is very different from 90 days with the plan. And knowing your rights doesn't mean filing blindly. It doesn't mean just throwing stuff at the wall just because you are under pressure. It means that understanding your options, understanding the strategy, understanding what avenues of recourse you have available while still deciding your next move. Because once that window closes, it does not reopen again. Litigation in district courts and EEOC timelines are very strict for a reason. They are unforgiving if you miss that window. Very unforgiving. You have to have a very strong business-based reason and justification. And even then, I would not always count on them allowing you to file something after that window closes. So it's always important to understand what your rights are, what the pattern is, and what strategy you're going to deploy after something happens to you in the workplace that either you were not expecting or you saw the signs and you didn't take action, and now you're ready to take those actions, making sure that you have everything in alignment and everything ready to go. So you ready to flip the switch and you ready to take action when the time comes. Because when there's some kind of like emotional fallout, the clock is already moving. And it's not about whether you have a case. That's not the situation, because you may absolutely have a case. You may absolutely have valid reasons, valid situations, valid things that happened to you in the work that were unfair, that were discriminatory, that were retaliatory, you were being treated differently from your peers, from your coworkers. That may be real, but the real question is, will you still have those options available in 60 days? Because the wrong audience, the wrong person, the wrong clock are three specific mistakes which all have the same core issues. And nobody told employees that the company was already preparing for your reaction. That's asymmetry. They already know that employees have spent years learning how to succeed at work, but always nobody knows what to do when work turns against them. And that's why I'm here to change that, because most employees think that the termination meeting was the beginning, but it's not. And for 30 years, I sat on the side that understood human behavior, emotional reactions, witness positioning, documentation strategy, organizations preparing all of it in advance before they even hand the person the termination paper and walk them out the door. And most people don't even realize that the case is shifting while they're still trying to process emotionally what has just happened to them. And I know that it's hard. I know it's not easy, but I also know that, again, timelines are also unforgiving. Organizations are unforgiving. I've had clients who have gone to their organizations basically pleading for extra time so that they can file a case against them, thinking that the attorney at the company would understand their pain, would have some kind of compassion, would lead with a level of empathy, but they don't. They were flat out denied those extensions and said, well, you should have known. There is no empathy there. There is a large gap there that employees don't realize because they are thinking that for some reason that the company is going to attempt to protect them or be fair in a process that was never intended to be fair from the beginning. And that I've seen this happen multiple times throughout my career, being in executive HR for 30 years. And I've seen it on my side personally when the system turned on me as well. And most people don't realize that they're making permanent decisions inside of temporary emotions, because getting fired isn't what destroys most cases. What happens next usually is. And if you're in this situation right now, don't make another move emotionally until you understand what you're building towards. What is that guiding post? What is your strategic plan? What is your after action plan? What are you going to do next? Because panic makes people react fast, but reacting fast is not always acting and being strategic. They are not the same thing. And the first emotional decisions that happen after impact are often the ones that create the most damage. And that's why people go and they post on all these social media sites, telling the world how bad their employer is and everything that happened that got them wrong and that they were terminated. That is the wrong move. The best move you can do is just sit still, process what happened, and come up with a plan to protect yourself and to protect your next move. So I come in because I actually offer a 1-to-1 rapid strategy session, which is a flat fee, 72-hour urgency window, which includes a documentation review, a situation assessment, next step strategy. So you would bring what you have to the table and you will leave with the plan of action. And if the timeline is active, then you start there. And I'm going to put that link in the show notes, but just in case, you can go to hr-armor.com/links, LINKS, and you can reach me there and we can come up with the plan together. And if you want to understand the system before you ever need to fight it, you can join the HR Armor membership. Because HR Armor exists for professionals who never thought that they would need to defend themselves at work until they suddenly did. The membership includes defense intelligence engines that I have built so it can help people navigate their situations, as well as trainings and group sessions and community discussions. So we can all just get in there and have a discussion about exactly what's going on in the workplace and how to navigate it skillfully. You don't have to have an active workplace situation to even join. So I'll link that again in the show notes for your consideration. Because when work turns against you, most people realize it too late. They never understood how the system actually operates. And at work, it's not if it happens, it's when it happens. This is HR Armor, and I'm pulling back the curtains because somebody has to say it out loud.